So Brad Rosen is a lawyer and teaches classes on the intersection of law, technology, privacy, and culture at Yale. Next to him is Adi Kamdar, who specializes in patent, free speech, and consumer privacy issues as an activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. My fellow lady over there is Lauren Moores. She's Vice President of Analytics at Media 6 Degrees and an advisor on data strategy for startups. And I think you probably know Drew Conway, who is co-chair of Gotham Data, founder of the nonprofit DataKind. And he started out as a computational social scientist in the US intelligence community, which is why we definitely wanted to include him today. And I'm your moderator. My name's Manoush. I host a show on WNYC called New Tech City, sort of looking at how technology is changing the way we live, the way we work. The people that don't necessarily understand the numbers, but they know that it means their kids are never talking to them. They're just always looking down. So with that, we chatted a little bit the other day on the phone about what we wanted to get out of this panel discussion. And Drew sort of summed it up. He's like, I want everyone to go home and have a total existential crisis over the weekend. So let the freak out begin, right? And I think to start that out, we really have to define, when we talk about data, when we talk about ethics, we're really talking about privacy all the time. That is the word that's coming up. And I think a lot of people, is definitely in the public, their mind glazes over when they think of ethics or privacy. Coming up here, I just got an email from PayPal that said to me, I got to read it to you because I was about to delete it and then I was like, oh, I'm about to do a privacy panel. Your privacy and trust are important to us, so we want to make sure that you read this annually. And I was like, delete, like, didn't even care. So Brad, let's start with that. When we're talking about privacy, what are we talking about? Is it about companies and their users, the bomb that there is there? Is it about the government? We're definitely going to delve into some NSA discussion here. How are we defining this?
So I think the problem with defining privacy is that it means something different to everyone. It's one of those terms that's inherently vague. And we have a separate problem that what one person considers private, another person may not. And my joke is, this is the Joy Behar theory of privacy. There's an old SNL skit, yes. Fred Armisen joking about Joy Behar saying, so what? Who cares? There are some pieces of information that you may not care if others know.
But the reason why a lot of us don't care is because we're getting all of this for free, right? I'm on Google Docs, I've got Yahoo Mail, and nobody's sending me a bill.
Well, so I think the thing that may make privacy the word where people get punched in the gut is whether or not you consider the information embarrassing. And that may be how we internally conceptualize of privacy. And that's actually really hard to translate to data because, for example, if you have someone's longitudinal coordinates, where is someone right now? That mere fact is not necessarily embarrassing. When it turns out that that coordinate, if you put it on a map, is an STD clinic, all of a sudden, that might become embarrassing. So there might even be missing context for whether or not data is private.
Now, Adi, do you agree with that? Because part of me says, well, whether it's an STD clinic or whether it's my kid's preschool, it's my business, not anybody else's. So whom are you speaking on behalf?
Who am I speaking on behalf? Well, ideally the users, right? People who are essentially, who are using technologies like the internet.
And is it because you're saying that those users have a basic right that people don't know where they are, or is it because you're protecting them from what they're doing?
I think people are protecting things that are embarrassing, but that is kind of it's a fringe case to some extent, yeah. And it ropes in other things that people want to protect. The simple idea that I want to, be private when it comes to where I am. I don't really do many embarrassing things yet. Maybe I do if it were out there. That being said, I don't want particular entities to know where I've been, especially when it's aggregated data, when it's I've gone to this place, I'm going to this place next, so on and so forth. Because that reveals a big picture about me that I don't know where this data is going to be collected and how it's going to be used in the future. And that's kind of where I draw the line right there, where it's I'm gonna stop talking there, I guess.
No, this is interesting. Drawing the line. I mean, I think that's what we're all talking about, and I think often it comes down to generational, right? Like younger people are this is the internet. It's open. It's free. There's nothing to hide. And then other people sort of straddling it, a little older like me, is like, well, wait a minute. that's one of my rights as a U.S. citizen. So Lauren, when you are talking to these companies and you're advising them, what sort of things are you telling them when it comes to this issue? Does it come up, or do you have to bring their attention to it?
I think that's a really good question. For the people that I'm working with now, if they're working in the mobile space, I think they're a little bit more aware that we have to be very careful about privacy in terms of personal identifying information. And a lot more startups are thinking about privacy by design. However, when I first started getting involved in clickstream data, say online data, at early 2000, we weren't thinking about the ramifications of storing data or getting things sent to us via our clients or maybe our own proprietary collection. We were just thinking, well, we're not going to do anything bad with it, so it doesn't matter. And that's can lead you down a very bad rabbit hole sometimes.
And what do you tell? So what are some of the ways that you sort of present that to them? What questions do you tell them that they have to ask themselves?
What are you using the data for? Do you have a specific purpose for it? Don't just, you can get in trouble if you just say, well, I'm just going to take everything because I don't know what I'm going to do with it, right? What you really need to do is to figure out what is your minimum value of data need, and then what protections are you going to take for that particular data that you're going to use? Are you going to aggregate it? Are you using consumer data? Do you need credit card data? What do you have to think about in terms of the FTC or others? You know, some industries like, say, ed tech, a little bit easier. You're not looking at specific student data necessarily, or you're trying to do some content analysis or semantic leveling. That's easy, right? When you're doing ad tech, which I do on my main life, you do have to worry about PII and the information that's coming across the systems.
So Drew, when the NSA revelations came out in June, what a summer it's been, were you surprised, or were you kind of like, yep?
I mean, I wasn't surprised because Wired Magazine had ran an article about the server center in Utah that the NSA was building, 7 months before that revelation of Edward Snowden. I think sort of my opinion on this is that the revelation, such as it is, that the NSA is doing the job for which we as taxpayers have decided that is their mandate, was surprising to me. The technological thing that I was surprised by as a citizen, so as someone who's paying their bills, was the broad strokes with which they took that. So I think on balance it is, we pay our taxes, some of which go to the NSA's work, to do signals intelligence and decryption and encryption. The fact that they're doing that is good, because that's what we're paying them to do. The way that they went about it, I think, with these broad strokes, and exactly as Lauren was saying, in the commercial industry, is what raises concern.
I mean, they basically broke Lauren's laws, which was her moral law, which was know what you're going to do with the data before you actually go and get it. I mean, there was some article that came out this week that said they were like, nobody knew who was getting what data. There was tons of it over there, and oh, there was some over there too, and...
Can you guys hear me? Is that...
Yeah, now we
can. They play word games. You know, this is a point that we've been harping on quite a bit, and it's something that's actually inconsistent if you look at the papers that have been released over the last few weeks now. They use words like collect, which means, oh, yeah, we suck in all this data, but until we look at it, we haven't collected it. And you're just like, I can give you a dictionary. That's not how we use that term. And that's where these issues arise, because they, even internally among the NSA, some people are like, well, we think we collected this, but we don't know if we actually collected this. We don't know what to tell the courts. We don't know what to tell the oversight committees. How are we going to, really crack down on the privacy aspect of this data?
Well, I'll just play devil's advocate on that point a little bit, which is, so if you do the comparison between the national security industry and the commercial, let's just use advertising industry as an example, the false positive and false negative problem that exists in both of those are, they're calamitous in the national security case, and they're just like, that was a missed impression, oh well, in the other case, right? So the fact that the national security industry is collecting, a tremendous amount of data, calling it collection, but not actually calling it their definition of collection until they have eyes on it, I don't necessarily see that as disingenuous, although I think the semantics of it are a little humorous.
Sketchy, humorous,
sketchy,
one or the other?
Maybe I wouldn't use that term. But I think, if you think about the human side, the people who work for the NSA are people too, right? So they're worried about missing something, not having the ability to find that needle in a haystack in a huge database that they may be asked to testify before Congress for if something goes wrong. Right? That the inverse of that is not true in industry, and I think that there's a little bit of unfairness in the direct comparison between the two.
Okay, so Brad, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, guys, the point for guys and girls, the point for all of you to take home is the United States government, to the extent that it has a brand problem, the question is one of, are they unconstitutionally collecting data? Are they doing something bad? What the government is doing with the data they collect and how they get the data they collect are different questions. So if the government is entitled to collect the data in the first place, what they actually do with it is less of a concern. The focus is on what are they entitled to collect. For you guys living in a consumer space or maybe an enterprise space, the bigger problem is unfair surprise, which is, number one, you probably got the consent to collect the data when someone signed your terms of service or gave you the data. That doesn't mean that you can use it without that user being annoyed. And unlike the government, they can decide to use another service, or they can write a horrible screed on their blog or on Twitter. And the PR hit that you take, it doesn't matter what your terms of service said. Now, they may sue you, you may win, but what the law allows you to do and what business practices allow you to do, popularity, are gonna be very, very different. And you're not concerned with what's legal, because that's the floor. If you're violating the law at that point, you've already got a problem with consumers.
Lauren, I want to come back to you when you're going to these companies, and who exactly are you talking to? Are you talking to the entrepreneur with the big idea, who's the sort of face of the company, or are you talking to the people who are indeed writing the code, collecting the information? Where does the responsibility lie?
Well, usually it's both, right? It has to be on the business side and the code side. I've been in a business situation where the business wanted to do certain things where I knew we were pushing the limits of the grayness of what we could use in order to create the market research. And it's like, well, we know we can bring in this, $300,000 project. I was like, are you kidding me? The liability involved just to understand that data or to get it out is ridiculous. It's not worth it. So you need to do both. And the people that I'm working with mostly now are smaller. So usually you're working with the founder and the CTO, and that's the two people. And so you better have a very good story. One thing that I was thinking about, we haven't talked about, is it doesn't matter if you have a right to take that data. Say you do have a right. Say NSA has the right or whatever. I'm not saying they do.
Yeah,
but
neither are we.
The problem is you can't always guarantee the access or non-access to that data. And so the security of where it is and the fact that, I'm going to put it in this database over here and there's Chinese walls around it and nobody's going to get access to it, doesn't necessarily mean that people haven't been able to get into it. And we've all probably been experienced where somebody's hacked into our credit card or somebody's hacked into our banking. Same thing's happening anywhere else where maybe that data was okay, but now it's not.
Drew, you're nodding with Chinese walls. Tell us about these Chinese walls.
Well, I mean, I think to Lauren's point, I think the scary thing, and one that's probably not, at least in the reading that I've done that hasn't come up a lot, is the fact that, the US government, along with many other governments in the world, are collecting all of this data, and the presumption of security within those databases is sort of just assumed, right? That we're mad about it, but it's in there. I mean, the fact is, there are no foreign intelligence services that work together, right? So they're spies, all of them. So they are hacking. They're hacking into each other's databases and creating, and lots of information is exchanging. To me, that becomes a tremendous problem, right? And so there are no particular vendors or particular software engineers, any one of these that have magic bullets that make it so they're unhackable, right? So this data that's being collected that just sits there becomes a liability as much as a resource.
Right.
It's something I just thought of. Is I once had a conversation with a vendor who I was doing third-party matching with. So everything's supposed to be anonymous. You send them a key, they send back the enhanced data to the key. It's a mapping. You can use it in your research. On the call, we invited somebody to participate. In that call, the vendor was, basically went against the confidentiality of a few people involved. And I was thinking, okay, that was just a minor call, and I could cover that. But the fact is that he just revealed all my sources to somebody who was on the phone, and you don't know if that's happening all the time. I basically shut down the call, and then I called them back up and said, you know, you really put me in a bad position there, and that was that you leaked confidential information. So.
And one point that I think is really important to raise, particularly in this audience where we have a lot of practitioners, many of whom have probably never had the pleasure of like sitting at Fort Meade and talking to the data scientists at the NSA or anyone in the intelligence community for that matter. These people take their jobs incredibly seriously, and they take your privacy as U.S. citizens incredibly seriously, to the point where they wake up in the morning, they live it, they breathe it, they eat it for breakfast, they care about it very, very deeply. You know, my experience in the startup community, in the commercial community, has not been met with the same kind of vigorous care for individual privacy. So one of the things that I found offensive about the way that this whole situation has been discussed largely is that the assumption is, oh, the NSA, the Joe analyst at the NSA is sitting there, reading people's email. This is absolutely not the case, right? These people care very, very deeply about people's privacy, and there are very, very strong laws in place and a very, very big jail at Fort Leavenworth where people go to if they break them.
Yeah, I think that the one thing about this
Adi,
story.
you need to respond.
I know, I can feel it.
I need to push back on that, partially because I don't necessarily, yes, there are a lot of good people there, and yes, there are a lot of very smart people there. No one's denying that. There have been cases of people reading other people's stuff. There have been a lot of privacy violations. I mean, these are the big leaks over the last few weeks. I think using such blanket terms that these are all good people who care about your privacy and eat it for breakfast. I mean, if they're eating your privacy, I think we should all be worried. Like this is something that some people think about, I'm sure, because they do have to operate within the bounds of the law. However they interpret it, though, and it's however they interpret it and however their higher-ups interpret it. And as we've seen with all these leaks, all these now released documents, people are interpreting the law in very different ways and in very wide ways. So anything goes.
Right.
Really.
So the legal thing. Brad, let's go back to you then. Interpretation. I mean, are we really talking about that both in the private and the public sector that there needs to be more clear rules, just plain rules?
And this is where I'll draw the distinction again between the private and the public sector. I think that having more rules in the private sector is not going to help, because I don't think that companies, when they sit down, they say, oh, let's look at the law and let's look at the floor. What's the least we can do? I don't think that's actually the case. I think the reason that you need more rules when you're dealing with a government is that you want to have clear delineation ahead of time what the government can and cannot do. We don't want to encourage necessarily the same creativity in government that we do in the private sector. And there's an example that I used with you earlier today that I'll use again. So I buy stuff on fab.com. It's great. I love it. I bought a 5-gallon jug of olives. I love olives.
That's another discussion right there, but go on.
I also bought a couple small jars of artisanal olives. I don't want ahead of time say, like, people that I buy stuff from on the internet can't mash up that data in interesting ways, right? I want companies to have the ability to be like, well, we've determined that you just bought like $200 worth of olives. Maybe we're going to send you this discount coupon for getnewolivesnow.com.
Which would make you very, very happy.
Which would make me very, very happy. Now, do I want the government to have that same flexibility? That's a discussion that we as a culture can have and say, no, we want the government to have to be able to ask permission before it can do that kind of data mining. Whereas for the private sector, I think we've gotten to the point as a society where we say, here are all the good things that come from creativity. We don't want to create a culture where American business is stifled.
I don't know if I agree with you on that. I mean, there are some people who feel pretty creeped out when they would, in this hypothetical weird olive situation, that they would get a coupon that, like, I don't really want you to know that I'm like a big olive lover. That's my business.
So do you think consumers should have the choice then to opt out?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, I'd love to know here, how many of you have opted out of something, said they're not going to give their data away? Okay. And how many of you have said, no, I am always giving away my data because that's my bread and butter? Interesting.
But this comes down to branding.
Yeah.
Because I think the distinction is brands you trust versus brands you don't. And right now, certainly I think the United States government has a brand problem that people don't trust it with data. But I think, how many people here trust Google with your data? right? Like how many of you use, so how many of you that didn't
Implicitly
raise
or
your hand
explicitly?
are using Gmail?
Yeah.
Right? So why, that's the
We're
question you should
so
ask yourself.
hypocritical, really.
Really
We're
hypocritical.
so hypocritical. Speaking of hypocritical, this is my lovely transition.
Oh, wow.
We were thinking about the Hippocratic Oath in the office and wondering, is there something that should there be something similar for practitioners of data?
That's interesting.
I mean, that's
Yes.
like the,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
I had a
Yes.
really weird experience when I was a teenager, and there, we used to have filing cabinets and stuff back in the day. And I worked at a hospital, and my job was to do photocopying, and I had to give an oath that I would not reveal any of the things that I photocopied. And one day, I came across the psychiatric file of my friend's girlfriend. And I was like, oh my God. But then I remembered my oath. And like, I remember it as a very seminal moment for me. Like, I have a responsibility here as an adult. This is not about me. Should there be something, Lauren?
No, I'm wondering how much the impact of data science and systems and computer science and machine learning and the fact that it's machine and it's code, it's bits and bytes, takes away some of that, I actually just copied that, I saw it visually, versus it being in a database that I can go maybe hack into. There might be a little bit of dissonance there because we've moved away from it, just the interaction with something concrete.
Yeah.
I also think an interesting thing from a practitioner point of view is I think for many data scientists, and I think many people in the room are probably their typical day-to-day life as a data scientist and not necessarily a data engineer or a database architect, is you're not actually doing the collection. Right? You're not the one deciding what part of the website is instrumented. I mean, in some cases you may be, like in the Chartbeat conversation we had before, but data is the thing for which you hold to be self-evident. Without that, you cannot do your job. So there's less of an ethical connection, right, to this transaction, because you didn't have any skin in the game as the analyst. It was handed to you, and someone said, now go do that. And in fact, that's very reflective, I think, of what happens in the intelligence community, right? Because the collection happens by satellite, by lots of things.
By magic.
By magic. And then analysts are just handed data. And in both cases, I think there's a lot of learning that can happen between those two groups, because I do think that analysts should have a much stronger ethical connection to the data. And part of that is an educational one. How is it collected? Why are we collecting these things? And most analysts don't think about those questions yet. And it's important that I think that they start doing that.
Adi, what do you think about that? Do you think that they need to start? Is that what?
Absolutely. I think this is something that we've put out a few sort of like mobile privacy bills of rights or social media bill of rights. Like these are things that aren't codified anywhere, but we think people should think about. People should think about giving users control. People should think about being as transparent as possible to a certain point. I think the interesting question is what happens when the law tries to codify these, or when the law tries to make it so that companies have to follow certain norms. So right now in California, there's a bill called AB'370 that's actually on the governor's desk right now. That's around do not track. Do you guys know what do not track is? For those of you who don't, it's basically a browser flag that says I don't want to be tracked, and then whoever reads the flag can do whatever right now. In other words, it's really confusing.
They track that they read the donut track.
They track that they read the do not. Yeah. So the law basically says every company in their policies, in their terms of service or their privacy policy has to say how they react to this do not track flag. Whether it's we don't track the users who have it on, or we look at it and acknowledge that it's there. But they have to be upfront about what they do about it. Now, this brings up a lot more questions around how do you put this into law? What is personally identifiable information? What is the information they're tracking? Are third parties involved in this? Because users aren't really interacting with them, but they're kind of interacting with them. Is there going to be a carve out in the law for them? It becomes very, very confusing and very, very tough to put this into law.
And that's when we come back to the don't know, don't care, because people get so frustrated and overwhelmed, and they think, well, Gmail works most of the time. It's fine.
But I think this is where there's another problem of some services, by their nature, do not track, makes them harder to offer. And another example is just people getting pickups from Uber, which is not as big as New York as it is in SF. But a lot of people use Uber to call a car. If Uber can tell that you've called a car at 5:20, at the exact same time on every Tuesday for the past 6 months, at 5:05, Uber should be able to send you a reminder like, hey, do you want a car in 15 minutes? I think, for a lot of people, like, that's really cool. Yes, there are a minority of people who would say that's probably like a really bad idea. Uber shouldn't be able to track that. But what if the result of Do Not Track was Uber's not even able to pull your location from your phone? For anyone who's used the service, what do you have to do? You have to now manually enter your address every time, and then Uber has to cross-reference that with either Google Maps or another mapping service and figure out where you really are, and it can no longer really use your GPS on your phone to verify where you are. If, under those circumstances, some businesses might say, we're not going to offer you service at all.
Right, because of that. But one of the things, Brad, that you talk about is like the it's not cool, bro, is how you call it. And what you're talking about is the opposite side, the flip side of that.
So this is the flip side. So the social norms are what I think are the main way we regulate privacy. The not cool, bro example that Manoush is talking about is, let's say you block someone on Facebook. And then one of your mutual friends then takes a screenshot of your Facebook wall and sends it to that person every day. Now I've been using, and you'd say that's not cool bro or not cool broette, as the case may be. And everyone's laughing, and I've been using this as an example for about 3 years. There's a recent court case where someone's coworker was taking screenshots of their Facebook page and sending it to the person's boss. And I actually sent it to Adi, and I was like, I called this.
Wow. And it's not cool.
It's not cool.
That's cool.
But,
That's crazy.
Should there be a law against that? Should we try to actually regulate that conduct? Or should the response just simply be like, okay, well, the person who was screenshotting my page, I'm now going to block you too, and I'm not going to be your friend anymore.
Just get off Facebook, for goodness sake. I mean, right? At the end of the day, I mean.
So, Manoush gave me another example today of her friend who no longer uses Instagram because he doesn't trust Facebook.
He was like, Instagram, you went to Facebook, not cool, and he killed himself on Instagram.
That's interesting.
And
that
that
was
should
fascinating. Good for him.
That's my point about social norms are the same way. If our social response is I'm not going to use this service or I'm not going to be friends with that person, I think that's what we're actually going to use to regulate a lot of the conduct. So the old joke is, if this would be on the front page of the New York Times and you'd be embarrassed, don't do it. For the data scientists, it'd be like, if I had to explain what I was doing to my 15 closest friends who aren't in tech, would more than half of them think I was scummy? If so, maybe I should say something that what I'm doing is a problem.
Well, and I think that there's a slippery slope with societal norms, right? I mean, I live with a catastrophist, is that what you call my husband? Like, he's always like, yeah, until the next Holocaust comes. You know what I mean? Like, so he puts in historical perspective that things can move very quickly. German society was all fine until, so that's another, tells you more about my marriage, really, than you needed to know. So we have a little bit of time left. I wanted to open it up to questions, because this is really all about what's going on in your lives when you're not sitting at a conference and what you're talking about with your colleagues. So we have the different angles on this represented on stage. So if you have a question, I see a woman right over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yell.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you're going to become a doctor, you have to go through an ethics course, numerous ones. You sign the Hippocratic Oath. Should there be something comparable for data scientists? What's the panel say?
I think yes, there should be, and I think that we're kind of in the very much the adolescence of that with respect to universities. So I mean, data science as a discipline there's the experiment out there whether it will be successful. And I think part of that success hinges on whether professors and instructors and students can get their head around this ethics thing. And I think that there will be kind of a stamp of approval, or hopefully, or maybe there needs to be a professional society that's doing these sorts of things, but I do think there's plenty of room for that.
Well, I'm curious to know, in the room, do you guys think that that would be something you would want to go through, or does that just seem like, I got work to do? Would you do it? Would you want it? Would you like to?
Would you join a professional ethics working group that would publish, here are the principles?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, all right.
It should be known that was a minority of people in the audience.
All right, who's got another question? Right over here, gentleman right in the blue shirt.
So
Real harm.
I think embarrassment's a very, very, very low barrier, but actual harm, maybe medical or some intelligence.
It's called the 60s, the civil rights movement, the people who were put on trial and on Congress for being communists. I mean, I think that's when we're looking historically what some people like my husband are certainly referencing. That's
there are again, and actually one thing that's actually important for this entire conference is let's always keep in mind the plural of anecdote is not data, right? So there are anecdotes.
I think about that for a minute. Okay.
There are anecdotes of, oh, well, my information was available on ChoicePoint, and so looked up my street address. And so was a person that I had a restraining order against and came to my house and beat me up. Like, there are these apocryphal stories that when you go to research, they're not as true. To your point of where are the actual problems, so a couple years ago, there's this patisserie in Grand Central. I forget the name. It's right by where the entrance to the subway. And a person there was either running a card skimmer or was directly accessing the database. And I had all these fraudulent charges on my credit card. So, this happens all the time where there are customers getting improper credit card charges because of employees who convert or steal database access. So to your point about everything being fine, I don't think everything is fine. I think that as a systemic question, is the system so broken that like grievous harm is happening to everyone constantly? I think the answer is no.
I mean, but we think that until, Edward Snowden, says, guess what, I've got some flash drives, and wow, suddenly everything changes in a moment, right? I mean...
Yeah, I think to answer your question, embarrassment is a very low bar, but that's the thing that sells newspapers to a certain extent, so that's what we've heard about. I certainly don't think you're going to be hearing a lot of sort of the physical harm that could have happened to, say, intelligence officers in the field as a result of these disclosures. I mean, that's just information that will never really come to light. Do I personally think that is a high likelihood that something bad could have happened? Yes. So that is an embarrassment, or that is more than an embarrassment, I should say. But you hear on the commercial side, I mean, can it ever really? I mean, I say that, and I think it's probably true. The answer is yes, but most of the time, you're really talking about embarrassment, right? Like the article about the teen who was shopping on Target, where Target knew she was pregnant before her parents did. I mean, that's
But what
harm,
about, there was a journalist who was searching for, I think it was she was doing a story about how to make a bomb, and her house got ransacked by a SWAT team because the research she was doing online. I mean, that's not okay.
If I'm trying to kill someone, I'm not, but if I'm trying to kill someone, right, and I research this person, and I get access to their medical records and learn that they have a horrific peanut allergy, that's an example of where I could use private information to do real harm. The problem with the question is that none of us have rejected the hypo. We answered it at face value. The problem with the question is, by definition, we're talking about a class of information where the primary bad thing about it becoming public from being private is embarrassment. Yeah, you can come up with corner cases like the example I just gave, but I think a lot of the types of information that we're talking about protecting is about embarrassment.
But I think it also, I mean, don't you agree that it spreads to other things? So we're working on a story right now about the CEO who's requiring all of his employees to wear Fitbits. And then you start to think, well, what's he going to do with that information? And what about the healthcare, sector who are not supposed to, now that he knows that somebody's maybe not well? I mean, it starts to seep into all different areas. Lauren, you're
No, I think it's more than embarrassment. I mean, it is your health records. It's do you say you're not a smoker, but you really are a smoker?
Right.
Are you overweight and they are tracking? They're going to give you a different premium on your health care because of that. There's the whole financial piece. That's really what the FTC has followed a lot of. It's like, what are you getting information that will help you identify particular users or use their identity? So identity theft, which has ruined a lot of people throughout the U.S. and it's taken them years to recover. Or even financial. I get a credit card number that comes through because guess what, guys? Clickstream isn't always the HTTPS, right? It's not necessarily encrypted. So this stuff happens, it's more than embarrassment.
Yeah, but in fairness, a lot of this stuff is either A, already regulated, or B, already criminal. So I mean,
Oh, it's criminal,
so
it happens.
So,
Right.
yeah, I guess that's where I interpreted the question as a little bit more of the stuff that was in the gray area
Got
where
it.
were people actually harmed.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take another question right there in the plaid.
So I'm wondering how much this idea of like opting out and removing yourself is kind of incoherent because you're actually opting in by using these services, right? Like, does it even make sense to opt out of or do not track on Facebook? Like that, this service wouldn't be useful then, right? I mean, like, you're not the data you supply to Facebook is the content and value.
It's the deal with the devil.
No,
Diaspora.
it's a really good question.
Confusion people suffer from that they trust Facebook to be private, and that's where they're storing private information. And that's actually the
Facebook's not private.
Okay, so the question is, like, a lot of these companies are were founded fundamentally on the fact that you're handing over your information. So this seems kind of ridiculous.
This is sort of my orange.
Yeah.
extreme example of that. There are much more subtle examples where you're just going to use some random site and you're like offering a little bit of information. And it's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
absolutely right.
And that's why a lot of the do not track discussion is, there tends to be a carve out or an exception to this first party, second party. I don't know where the parties are coming from anyway. Where, if I'm interacting with the site, if I actively go on the site, yeah, sure, I'm offering up my data to them. I don't really want them sharing it with company, XYZ over here, or these other data brokers necessarily that I don't necessarily know about, that I have no way of opting out of, or if I do, it's very hard.
Or maybe it's an implicit agreement like, well, okay, I'll give you, company, my information, but please don't share it with anybody and don't sell it to anybody, but I also really would like your service for free.
Or here's the information I'm voluntarily giving to you, but if I'm on this other website, like, don't have your
Pause
tracking
in there.
cookies follow me.
This goes back to unfair surprise. If your users feel surprised by something you've done with the data, that's the thing that you need to worry about. And for those of you, this is a couple
But
years.
not legally.
Not legally, but that's your user problem.
So it's all PR.
The Girls Near Me, which was a mashup of Facebook and Foursquare, yes, it was violating the Foursquare terms for use of data, but it was showing you pictures of, quote, hot girls nearby. And a lot of people were upset about it. That was a classic case of the reason people were upset was they didn't realize this could be done with their data in theory.
My solution to this
Yes.
is to have Larry Buchanan from the New Yorker design all the terms of service.
Yes, yes.
Right there.
Yeah, so a lot of the legal and regulatory stuff you guys are talking about is it's permission focused. It's you sign a term of service says you are allowed, like, I'm giving you permission to collect such and such data on me. And the terms of service are typically hypothetical. They say we might collect such and such data. We have the right to collect such and such data. I mean, do you think there's a role for a more like disclosure-based type of regulation, which is saying I did collect such and such data on you, and I did provide it to such and such agencies or such and such, commercial partners or whatnot, right? So that was my point, which I think is a little bit why the NSA, like Drew was talking about kind of an implicit permission for giving the NSA,
Yeah.
but it was really the disclosure that was actively being done that resonated with me.
I think that's so the question is, should we flip it, basically? Should we say, should these companies and potentially the government say,
It's very hard. So that's the other bill in California right now that has been tabled, and there's a lot of discussion around it right now. It's called the Right to Know Act. This is a bill that says companies have to basically disclose what they're doing with your data and who they're giving it to and what data they have about you, which is a tall order to ask, especially for big companies, small companies, whoever. But at the same time, when companies are taking your data and selling them to other folks or giving them to other folks, when people find out about that after the fact, it's like what Brad said. People aren't happy often. And people aren't pleased with that, especially when these other companies, these fourth-party companies, have a history of either disclosing that to the government or selling it to other companies that you as an individual don't want a relationship with, or you don't want them knowing these 1,500 points of information about you. So it is being talked about. Whether it's going to pass, whether the innovation community is going to actually support something like that, it remains to be seen.
And I think that that's a key note to leave it on, that the innovation community is finally gelling in some way politically, and so maybe we can look to see that going forward. Unfortunately, we have to leave it here. I hope that you're having like palpitations and anxiety inside. I want to thank our panelists. You guys really, really great.
Thanks.